Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We're just going to wait a few minutes to allow others to join the call. And I see people are still joining at a quite rapid pace, so we'll just give folks a few more minutes. I'm impressed how many folks are joining us this morning or this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you're sitting. So I'll just give folks a few more minutes to join. I know sometimes it's hard to get in when everyone joins at the same time. So I see that our numbers are still increasing. So I'll speak slowly at the beginning as we allow people to continue to join in, whether you're in your morning hours and starting your day, you're in your afternoon looking forward to the end of your day and we can help you get there, or you're getting ready to end your day. I want to welcome you to this webinar. My name is Rachel Stoll. I'm the Vice President at the Stimson Center, and really excited to welcome you to this virtual event on what would have been the first day of the Arms Trade Treaty Conference of States Parties. This event is part of a collaborative project among the following organizations: UNIDIR, the Stimson Center, Small Arms Survey, and Conflict Armament Research. And the project is currently supported by the governments of Germany and France, and we're very appreciative for their support. I'm really pleased to be part of this research project and of course this event today that looks to enhance knowledge and facilitate dialogue to strengthen our shared understanding on the impact of the Arms Trade Treaty in addressing the risks of diversion in arms transfers, and to identify options and avenues to further promote effective policies and practices under the treaty moving forward. Over the course of this multi-year project, we aim to identify progress made by states parties in promoting and implementing effective counter-diversion measures, to assess the impact and results of the progress achieved by the states parties under the Arms Trade Treaty, and identify options to strengthen the roles and contributions of the Arms Trade Treaty to support states parties in addressing the evolving risks of diversion. So as part of that work, I'm really excited for today's discussions, which under different circumstances we would have loved to hold in Geneva, but I'm so appreciative of my co-panelists today for their flexibility and their willingness to join in this discussion, and to all of you from around the world who have also joined us today. So this event is really a conversation. The conversation with experts and government officials that are leading the work on diversion in the context of the Arms Trade Treaty. And we're going to be spending our time together looking at ways in which the processes under the Arms Trade Treaty, including the working groups, are facilitating and promoting implementation of effective counter-diversion measures. So our aim is to discuss the efforts undertaken within the Conference of States Parties process and how they contribute to strengthening national and multilateral approaches to prevent, mitigate, and respond to diversion at the national and multilateral level. This is not just a job for the ATT, but also for states to take individually and collectively. So just to give you a run of the event today, first, we will hear from Jonah Leff, who is the Director of Operations for Conflict Armament Research, who's going to share a brief introduction to the issue of diversion and unpack some of the issues that we will discuss here. And then I'm really pleased that we have 3 distinguished government representatives that will join me in an open conversation on diversion and the ATT. We are so grateful to have the president of the 6th Conference of States Parties and ambassador to the United Nations and international organizations for the government of Argentina, Ambassador Frederico Villegas. Thank you, Mr. President, for joining our event today at what I know you hoped would be your first day in person, but we're pleased to have you here. I'm also very pleased to welcome Ms. Stella Petrovich, who is Senior Advisor to Foreign Trade of Arms and Military Equipment at the Ministry of Trade, Tourism, and Telecommunications for the government of Serbia, and who serves as the facilitator of the ATT CSP6 sub-working group on diversion. That's a mouthful. Thank you, Stella, for being here today. And of course, we have Mr. Tom Neese, the Principal Legal Advisor for Strategic Goods Control at the Flanders Department of Foreign Affairs, Belgium, and who serves as the co-chair of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting. Welcome to you as well, Tom. So let's get started. Poorly regulated arms transfers, including their diversion, enable and accelerate conflict and armed violence. So understanding the evolving risks associated with and impacts of poorly regulated arms transfers is really essential in developing effective prevention and risk mitigation strategies and action. And the Arms Trade Treaty really underscores the importance of responsible arms transfers to reduce human suffering and the need to prevent and eradicate the diversion of conventional arms to the illicit market and for the unauthorized end use and end users. And this is really central to the whole object and purpose of the ATT. So certainly the ATT represents an essential benchmark from which further progress can be made, but there's often a lack of shared understanding among states on how the treaty has contributed to reducing diversion risks so far and what new opportunities exist to improve policies and practices to tackle the diversion of arms transfers. So I want to start with Jonah to explain to all of us, what are we talking about today? Why is this important? And what should we know if we're going to have a conversation on diversion?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel, and for the Stimson Center for hosting this event. And also many thanks to everyone in virtual attendance as it is today. I'm honored to be here and with such esteemed panelists. As you mentioned, I'll spend a few minutes providing some background on the problem of diversion, and will also highlight some of the data that we at Conflict Armament Research have gathered on the issue to illustrate my points. Just quickly, for those of you who don't know us, CAR works in more than 25 conflict-affected countries worldwide, supporting governments to combat diversion through tracing illicit weapon flows. So just a little bit of background. States parties to the ATTs have made preventing and addressing diversion a priority in the first years of the treaty. It has already been the thematic focus of 2 CSPs, both under the Japanese presidency at CSP4, but also this year's special focus of the Argentinian presidency is on the role of transparency and information exchange in preventing diversion. And we're, of course, very encouraged to see that development. States parties have demonstrated their commitment to tackling diversion through the ATT process through initiatives such as the creation of the sub-working group on diversion, currently chaired by Serbia, as Rachel mentioned, and also the development of a diversion information exchange platform through the working group on transparency and reporting, which is led by Belgium and Mexico. This continuing collective focus highlights that diversion is a problem that affects all states. States are impacted in different ways depending on their role in a transfer supply chain, but ultimately diversion serves to weaken everyone's security because this is a global problem that can affect all. As we stated in the first issue brief produced under this collective research project by CAR, Small Arms Survey, Stimson Center, and UNIDIR, quote, preventing diversion presents an enormous global challenge, and diversion remains a danger to lives, livelihoods, and stability in many countries, end quote. It's everyone's in best interest to identify and implement effective measures to limit diversion and its corrosive impact on international security. In order for states to develop effective strategies to combat and counter weapon diversion, it is necessary to strengthen common understandings of how that diversion occurs and how the risks of diversion differ across the various actors involved in arms transfers, as well as where in the supply chain diversion might occur. And of course, the ATT provides the best framework for states, industry, and also civil society organizations working on the front line of diversion prevention and mitigation to bring their expertise and resources. Our EU-funded iTrace database, for instance, generates unique evidence on the diversion of weapons and ammunition in armed conflicts. Since CAR's establishment in 2011, we've documented more than 500,000 diverted weapons and ammunition, comprising some 14,000 unique chains of custody. Our investigations reveal a dynamic baseline of how weapons and ammunition result in illicit possession in conflict zones around the world. An analysis of more than 1,000 separate chains of custody of diversion has highlighted common mechanisms. For example, 12% of these analyzed cases saw that diversion resulted from insufficient stockpile security, or PSSM. 22% of cases result from state-sponsored diversion, which often involved unauthorized retransfer in violation of the terms of an end-user agreement. 30% of cases comprise diversion following loss or capture in active fighting. And then we've also documented a small percentage of diversion cases that stem from state collapse and also diversion from private actors. The risks associated with each of these diversion mechanisms will be very different, but each can be mitigated and lessened through a robust and comprehensive diversion risk assessment that can take into account risks that might occur not only while the items are in transfer, but also after they have reached the intended recipient. Risk assessments are the first point of intervention in a transfer chain. They are an opportunity to analyze all points of weakness in a supply chain before items change custody. And because the risks are so different depending on the transfer parties and various transfer stages involved, and the nature of the risks themselves are difficult to observe and determine, states may need to draw on a wide range of expert sources, both internally within their own governments, but also externally. In this sense, a multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder effort is really key. Action to mitigate diversion can only be achieved through robust mechanisms for information sharing. Governments themselves often lack the capacity and full breadth of information to conduct risk assessments. Therefore, we encourage the role that civil society and industry can bring to enhancing this process. Just for an example, our own field investigations repeatedly identify red flags that states might incorporate into their own assessments. Just to highlight one example, we documented material that originated in the EU in South Sudan, which is subject to EU and UN arms embargoes. Our investigations found that this material was being retransferred without authorization by one of South Sudan's neighbors. In some cases, these transfers involved intermediary entities that had previously been identified by UN panels of experts as having been involved in diversion to other sanctioned entities. Our early warning reporting of these cases back to the countries of origin have led to several instances where states informing us that they have now suspended or revoked future licenses to the diverting partner. This is encouraging, but it is just as critical that future diversion risk assessments incorporate these identified risks as well. I think the working groups have played a key role in developing guidance and platforms for states to discuss both policies and practices relating to diversion and to alert each other to actual diversion risks and experiences. This panel provides an opportunity to discuss the progress being made on the topic of identifying and preventing diversion risks under the ATT, and I really look forward to the exchange of ideas with my fellow panelists in the minutes and hour ahead. And I guess with that, I will leave it there and pass it back to you, Rachel. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonah. I just want to pick up on something you said, that this really is a collaborative effort, that this is not only something we should be talking about at the CSP or in the CSP context, but that there's a lot of work being done at the national level, as well as with civil society and industry. And so I really want to spend at least the next hour talking about the ways in which we can all work on these issues collaboratively. So I want to bring in our other three panelists as well to discuss the ways in which the ATT is addressing diversion. Jonah, you're welcome also to join in that conversation. I don't want to lose you. So we're going to run this session just for our audience as a Q&A that I'll moderate for some time, and then we will allow each panelist to respond to those questions that I pose if they wish. And after about an hour or so, I will open the conversation up to our attendees. There is a Q&A function on this webinar on the bottom of your screen, and you should be able to type in your questions as we're going along. And once we finish our sort of moderated conversation, I will turn to those in the Q&A. So please, at any time, you may start asking your questions. So let me just, based on what Jonah said, I think there are a number of challenges that you sort of described and laid out there, Jonah, in addressing the diversion of conventional arms. So looking at this within the ATT context, there's no universally accepted definition of diversion, which can sometimes contribute to limited understanding of what diversion is and how to recognize it, or give states a pass on addressing it at all, if you want to sort of think on the cynical side. Two, as you described, the fact that diversion occurs at a range of points along the life cycle of an arms transfer. And three, you also mentioned the wide range of actors that can be involved in a diversion. It's not just one piece of the chain. So all of these challenges really reinforce the importance and need for states to exchange information on measures undertaken to address diversion, which is really the theme of the president's paper this year and the theme of CSP 6. So I want to unpack all of those issues a little bit and ask our panelists, how does a lack of definition of diversion in the ATT impact the work of the working group or the treaty processes in general? And I'll just open it to all panelists, reminding you to unmute yourself before you speak and allow you to take the floor. Yes, please, Ambassador.
Hello, Rachel, thank you very much. And thank you for my fellow panelists and for the invitation. I just wanted to put something in discussion, which is sometimes we deal with something that we so passionate develop, like ATT. As you know, ATT has been a community basically of civil society and government officials in the last 25 years that we all decided to develop a new instrument to address something that was needed. Basically, that's it. But sometimes we have to realize that at the moment when we started talking about transparency in conventional weapons, the world was not paying attention exactly to that issue. When we started the Register of Conventional Weapons in '93, we were at the highest point of the post-Cold War era. And that world focused mainly on arms, mass destruction weapons. In a way, the world was very much paying attention to whatever was needed in order to eradicate mass destruction weapons, limit their use, etc., but also the diversion related to mass destruction weapons. So, for example, I give you a concrete example of Argentina's experience. We developed what we call Régimen de Control de Exportaciones Sensitivas, which is a sensible export national regime of control. And at the end, it said, and material bélico, y material bélico, and conventional weapons. So even when we created our national control systems at that time, the conventional weapons part was like something at the end. And we, in a way, worked as countries and at a national level in order to make sure that there was no diversion in this type of nuclear, chemical, biological, missilistic, etc. So the dual use, etc. But now the diversion and the lack of a definition also is part of the discussion on how do we realize what is wrong. And sometimes the national level, and with this I conclude my first comment, I think we still need to discuss exactly the elements that give us the information, the accurate information that the diversion, even if we don't have a definition, a diversion under the term of the ATT is occurring. And that's what we are trying to develop in the ATT now. That's why the subject will be part of all conference until we have a system working that can prevent a diversion. If we get a system within ATT that in an actual case, through exchange of information or through the cooperation of developing national systems that are strong and have the tools to prevent, and we are able to prevent diversions, then the system is working. But we're in the process of rethinking that.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm just going to add to sort of my question and say, diversion clearly is an issue. It plays a prominent role in the treaty itself. There's an entire article dedicated to diversion. And so I'm wondering, as we're looking about the fact that there's a lack of a definition of what that is, we also, though, can point to progress, as you said, that has been achieved in the implementation of the ATT that has to do with diversion. So maybe putting those two together, there's a lack of definition on one hand, but we have clear evidence of progress being made by states on the other. I'm wondering if you all could discuss those efforts as well. Tom.
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting myself. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for all the organizations that invited me to be part of this panel of those in charge of anything concerning the work of the ATT regime on diversion at this moment. And also from me, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Building on what the ambassador said, I firstly wanted to come back to your first specific question about the lack of definition and to what extent that might hamper our work. And taking into account what you added on to your question, in fact, I think that the lack of definition hasn't stopped us as ATT office holders, as working groups, as participants in the meeting that we have to have a bit of an understanding what kind of measures we need to discuss. And you said yourself, there's a lot of attention in the treaty given to diversion and diversion measures, specifically also on information exchange concerning diversion. I won't go into the details of that. I'll do that later on. But through those provisions, and also through the fact that already in the preamble of the treaty, there is talk about diversion to the illicit market for unauthorized end use and end users. We all have a bit of an idea, if we read those provisions on diversion in the treaty, what we are dealing with. And then the fact that we do not have a agreed definition on them, I think, and then I specifically also look now at the diversion information exchange forum that we want to establish, that is not necessarily a bad thing, because it basically also allows states a very broad scope of different types of cases of what they could consider as diversion at all stages of the transfer chain to bring that to the attention of other states, parties, of signatory states. So in that regard, for the work that we hope that we can do within that platform that we are establishing, I think maybe it could even be a positive point that we don't have a very demarcated idea of what we should consider as a diversion. I will talk about the process in general a bit later when you ask me a specific question on that.
Thanks, Tom. Stella, I did want to give you an opportunity to jump in if you would like.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. I will start to try to answer this question by the fact that every research defining the important terms for every research is of the great importance to define important terms, and it is essential in order to ensure common understanding of the key concept of that research. In this concrete case, ATT does not contain a formal definition of diversion, but we have to mention that the whole article, Article 11, refers to diversion, and it is one of the most important, and we can say it is one of the most complex articles of the whole treaty. Having in mind that, and having in mind the whole importance of diversion, ATT started and having in mind that a lot of work regarding diversion has to be done, working group on effective treaty implementation established permanent sub-working group on diversion, especially to challenge this process, how to mitigate the risks of diversion. When we are talking about the term of diversion, we have to say that the word diversion is derived from the word divert, and it is the process of diverting authorized transfer of arms to unauthorized end user, or it is unauthorized use of these arms. So in that case, we have to make distinction between these two terms, unauthorized end user and unauthorized end use. During the previous work of sub-working group on diversion, especially during the preparation meetings for CSP 5, This topic was discussed, and it was discussed by state parties, as well as it was discussed by the civil society. I think that although we do not have a universal definition of diversion, we may define the diversion as controlled items authorized for export to one end user, but delivered or diverted to unauthorized end user or used in unauthorized ways. So we have for sure a lot of to do regarding diversion, regarding potential identifying the potential risks when we are talking about our global problem, but for sure, lack of definition would not stop the process of this of our future work.
Jonah, you wanted to, thank you, Stella. Jonah, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, just quickly, Rachel. Yeah, I think on the issue of definitions or lack of definitions, I just wanted, again, to point to the issue brief that we recently published as part of this joint project, because I think that's a large subject of that piece. But in addition to that, our research has also highlighted a lack of common understanding of key terms that enable loopholes and ambiguities which facilitate diversion. Just for one example, and we published on this last year, was a study we did on end user documentation where we examined a sample of 75 end user documents and found that there were 19 different variations in how states express their commitment not to retransfer weapons and ammunition. And also in several cases, these clauses suggested inadequate commitments to the exporter. So there's still, I think, some work to be done there. And also on the issue of information sharing, and I'm sure we'll get to that later in the discussion, I think it's often talked about, but it is a bit of a nebulous topic without clear instruction on what information sharing really means, what are the tools that can be incorporated, who the various actors are needed in robust information sharing. But having said all of that, as I mentioned earlier, we've definitely seen examples of cases where governments have revoked or refused export licenses and how decisions have been made based on diversion data. Yeah, I mean, I think that's been really encouraging. And then just one more point, I think one new area where state practice has been rapidly developing, just to answer the second part of your question, is in developing and exploring options for post-delivery verification, which again, I think is probably something that my fellow panelists will probably delve into. But I just wanted to highlight from our perspective, that's a very welcome initiative and something that I think also we and potentially other non-governmental organizations and industry have experience with and can assist states who may not have the capacity to conduct robust post-delivery verification. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonah. I think those are good points. Tom, did you have something you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I just wanted to respond about one point that Jonah made about terminology and common understanding of concept. I could not agree more with Jonah that when it comes to end user documentation about assurances that are included in those kind of documents, and they're understanding them by the parties that would have to comply with the assurances that are given, that there is definitely a problem that we need to be solved. And I think that on the level of the EU, where I obviously also follow these kind of discussions, we have now also understood them for ourselves. As an example, we are now working on a council decision, a binding document that will deal with end user documentation in the case of exports of small arms and light weapons, Also a little bit in the hope that we can come to a bit more of a common understanding, not just among us, but also the broader, the important, the end users themselves, on what those assurances are, how they need to be complied with, and so forth. So in that, I totally agree. When I was first talking about definitions, I just talked about the definition of what do we understand as diversion. And in that extent, I think that there, based on what is in the treaty, based on what we are discussing, that we all aware of where the problems lie. That is also something that you, in your reports, have highlighted very much, and which we also obviously take into consideration. But yes, that's me for now.
Thanks, Tom. I think those are some important points, and allow me to sort of lead us to be more forward-looking, because there are so many different initiatives that are taking place within the ATT context. We have the president's paper, which, as Jonah mentioned, this is the second time that diversion has been sort of a theme of the conference itself, but it's also sort of now cemented itself in the permanent process of the ATT through the establishment of the sub-working group. There are several recommendations in the president's paper that states can take on their own as well, that it's not just up to the ATT process to guide the work on diversion. So I'm wondering if we can sort of look at what is being done under the ATT process, including in the working groups, Tom. So now I'm asking you specifically about the work of the working groups, not only of the working group of transparency and reporting, but also the working group that Stella chairs on diversion, in terms of facilitating and promoting implementation of effective counter-diversion measures by states parties. So we just talked about end-use certificates and end-use assurances, but there are many more steps that these processes are taking. So I'll open it to all of you to sort of comment on the steps that you, as the chair of a working group or the president of the process, are instituting.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. A few minutes ago, I had some technical problems, so I was off for a few minutes, I think, from the discussion, but now I'm here at the right time. Yes, the focus of the sub-working group is on the three main parts of the transfer chain, according to multi-year working plan. Multi-year working plan is established as a live document, and according to multi-year work plan, focus of the sub-working group is on three main parts. First part is before the transfer chain. The second part is diversion that may occur during the transfer. And the third part of transfer chain is after delivery, as diversion may occur after delivery. Mostly it is the most common situation when diversion occurs. The sub-working group is formed to improve concrete mechanisms of actions and for better understanding of regulations related to diversion. And the main goal of a sub-working group is to ensure application of diversion prevention measures in practice. Our common goal is not only to have only legal obligations, but also to use this to answer on this obligation in practice, and to using different kind of mechanisms to ensure that we have to prevent diversion during the three before mentioned parts of transfer chain. During the work of sub-working group on diversion, we already have discussions regarding the first part of the chain before the transfer, and we already discussed how important is export control, as we have to build a very professional export control who is implementing regulations and laws who are in line with ATT and other international obligations. We have to have professionals in export controls who are trained to spot possible red flags and to start with preventing measures on time. Having in mind all of that, we have to establish better international cooperation, both bilateral and multilateral. And also we have to involve in this cooperation different factors. We can say that government and official authorities are the main factors in this process of diversion, but we have to mention that also we have very important factors who can help in preventing the diversion. That subjects are private sector, industry, and civil society, of course, which is sometimes first in the first line, and as we heard before, for example, conflict armament research is always on the right place when the diversion is occurred. So they have information. They first have information regarding diversion. So we have to involve all subjects in order to prevent diversion on the right way. Thank you.
Thanks, Stella. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that CAR is there when a diversion occurs. It has. Ambassador Tom, did you want to add anything in this discussion? Ambassador, yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to stress that sometimes we are getting a sensation that it's normal what we are doing and how we are doing things. And I can tell you as president of CSP6, it has been quite a challenge to decide as member states what to do this year with the COVID. And because, you know, when I arrived at Geneva, I thought I had this sensation that all multilateral organizations in Geneva got together online and decided what to do, how to do things, whether to have or not meetings, whether to postpone everything, and if they had meetings, how to do it. And when I arrived, the shocking thing was that each organization, in a way, decided to do things in a different way. And that is also for the state parties conferences. And so what I wanted to stress is that this diversion issue is such at the heart of ATT that regardless of the paralyzation practically that we had in the last month at the international level, we were able to move forward.
I think we might have lost the ambassador for a moment. We'll give him a second to come back, and perhaps while we're waiting, let Tom, oh, Ambassador, you're
Sorry.
back? No, that's
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'll let you continue.
Yes, I'm back. Yes, I just wanted to say what we are witnessing is a lot of work being done and carried out in this past month in order to continue addressing the specific things on diversion to move forward in ATT. And we could have, honestly, we can always see half full, half empty. But I can tell you that many organizations, many important conferences decided just to delay everything for 2021. And we are talking at the highest level, at the heart of ILO, WTO, etc. So we decided to do something different, very strange, I can tell you, because the silent procedure and the written procedure of a conference is like anti-natural. It's because the essence is civil society participation. The essence is being able to discuss wording in order to amend a resolution and maybe improve a resolution. Everything that we thought of a negotiation process in order to improve our working plan, our decisions, our forum, we weren't able to do it because of this awkward situation of a written procedure. But we decided as a third parties that it was better to have this than not to have a CSP6. So that's, we have to keep in mind, and I commend the sub working groups and everything that is being carried out in order to have, regardless of the situation, a successful CSP6, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Certainly the work does not stop just because we are all dealing with this global COVID pandemic. And certainly the work of governments, but also the work of those involved in the illicit arms trade does not stop either. And so, you know, constant, I think, vigilance and attention is good, and having an ambitious work plan despite the circumstances is important. And I wonder, Tom, I want to turn to you to talk about the work of the working group on transparency and reporting in this vein as well, because this isn't just a, you know, it's the working group on diversion that has to address this. It's really across all ATT processes.
Thank you, Rachel. Before I explain why also the transparency working group is dealing with this issue and what we have achieved, I just have to confirm what the ambassador said, that especially in the last 2 months, we've put a lot of hard work into getting somewhere on this specific issue. And we also have to thank him for his involvement in that work, because that certainly helped us to move a few issues concerning our work forward. Now, what I said about why is the transparency working group also involved on this, after hearing Stella give a very comprehensive overview of all the work and all the discussions that are happening in the subgroup that she facilitates. Well, basically, that goes back to the mandate that the transparency working group has concerning formats, processes, dealing with all kinds of information exchange that is included in the treaty. And in that sense, it is very clear when you read the treaty that there are a lot of encouragements in there concerning information exchange on diversion. You don't only have Article 11 that is specifically, obviously, dealing with diversion, but there's also the reporting article, and then very importantly also the article on international cooperation, where there again is a very strong encouragement on information exchange. So that is basically the reason why also in the transparency working group we were looking at that, and why at CSP4 already the conference adopted the so-called three-tier approach on diversion, which was discussed in the transparency working group before. And there, that three-tier approach basically tried to bring together three things that deal with diversion on basically two the two main platforms that we needed to. On the one hand, we have let's call it more general policy oriented topics that are addressed in the subgroup on diversion, according to the multi-year work plan that was adopted already then, and that we are still in the process of implementing. And then next to that, you have the very operational part of it, the provisions in the treaty that deal with diversion information exchange, obviously deal also with information that states have on what is actually happening in the world. The cases that Jonah was also talking about, that kind of information exchange was thought not so easily be included in the discussions of the subgroup on diversion, and required a bit of a different platform. And so the three-tier approach on diversion that included something what was then called the informal meeting between states parties and signatory states on diversion information exchange or concrete cases of diversion. That meeting then required certain debate between states parties and signatory states on how to take that forward, and that led then in the end over the past year and into the remote consultations that we have just now to this what we called the Diversion Information Exchange Forum between states parties and signatory states, to really go into the operational aspects of diversion exchange. I don't know whether you want me to go into the very specifics of what we are going or intending to discuss there. Maybe I can do that later, since I don't want to make this into a monologue, but basically that is already how the process evolved within the ATT framework on diversion information exchange. And I will wait for your question on what specifically then we intend to do there.
Thanks, Tom. Jonah, before I turn back to Tom's question, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, maybe just quickly. And I think Tom did a very good job of laying out the development of this. And again, despite my maybe perceived critiques or identifying shortcomings, I have definitely been encouraged over the last few years on all the developments that you and others have taken to this, have brought to this process. There was just one thing I wanted to point out. In addition to the work of the working groups and the information sharing that might occur within them, which I understand is complicated because there is a balance to strike between confidentiality and the need for that, but also the promotion of transparency, which the ATT, I think enshrines. But in addition to that, I think it's worth mentioning that that tracing is also a really important aspect of information sharing. And there isn't a whole lot of discussion around tracing, but it often, even to identify a case of diversion, requires correspondence across several actors. And then all of the follow-up involved in that really facilitates a large dissemination of information across the concerned parties. And I think it would be useful for that information to even go beyond those concerned parties. And that's something that we're trying to promote here at CAR, but also for governments to, and perhaps even the sub-working group, to take into consideration how that information that is transmitted maybe bilaterally can be brought to a broader audience, so that states that may not be affected directly by an actual case of diversion may find that information still useful, whether it's directly involving a specific entity or just a pattern that is emerging. So yeah, I mean, I think there's still some more work that can be done in that way. And identifying these red flags, I think broadly speaking, it does enable states to make better decisions regarding who they conduct business with.
I think that's a really important point, Jonah, because I think a lot of the work being done on diversion really is striking that balance, right? We're striking a balance between being very practical and giving states specific tools such as tracing and training on how to utilize tracing, as well as some of the loftier, bigger picture ideas. Like it's important for states to exchange information and have measures that really tackle at the basic level some of the difficulties that we're talking about. So I do want to pick up on the point Tom raised about the diversion information exchange platform, because I think the president's paper, as well as draft decision 13, talk about the need for states to exchange information on diversion. And I think there is very much a need for states to have confidence in that confidentiality, that if they're sharing specific intelligence information or specific cases, that they can do so without being criticized openly or having those details revealed publicly. That said, the root of the ATT is about transparency and sharing that information, not just among states parties, but actually could help states develop, who are not part of the ATT, develop best practices and hear from civil society organizations, industry that have been engaged in this fight against diversion. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how you envision this diversion information exchange platform really working with or in conjunction with the ambitious agendas that you all have outlined with regards to the work of the ATT on diversion. And then I'll ask a follow-up question about sort of the role of civil society and others in that process. But maybe for those, since we have so many people participating today that may not even know what we're talking about, maybe outlining, Tom, as you said, some of the ways in which that process would work, and particularly in conjunction.
Well, thank you. I was happy that Jonah referred to the need for transparency or information sharing about real cases of diversion, not just with the states that are actually involved in those cases, but also broader to other states parties. Because that is basically the background of the Diversion Information Exchange Forum, which will be established normally. We still have a few days left, I think, on the decision making, but normally that will be established. And in that sense, I want to make clear something that we are talking here about one of them two fora dealing with discussing diversion. Here we are really talking about that operational aspect, where in principle the forum is just a forum between states parties and signatory states for the reasons that Rachel also already spelled out, and that is then a complementary forum to the subgroup on diversion that already pre-existed the forum, where the more general policy measures can be discussed to prevent and address diversion. Also based on, because that's also a point that I wanted to make, any general lessons, major trends that have come out, the exchanges in that forum on operational cases. But to be very clear about about that and about what that forum will actually do, and on how the exchanges in there will hopefully help states parties to prevent and address diversion. Let me say that that is a bit of also a two-way process. First and foremost, as it is an operational forum dealing with real-world cases, one of the aspects that we hope, obviously, is that it can still prevent or address those concrete cases that we are talking about. That's also why there will be an encouragement for actual enforcement officers to take part in that meeting, so that the real cases that are presented might already, or that information exchange might already contribute to prevent or address the cases themselves that are presented. But then on the other hand, obviously, what our hope is that through that very operational information sharing, that will bring information to other states parties and to other signatory states about very also concrete information that they can then use in their export assessments, what you, Joanna, also referred to in the export assessment, but also in import controls, transit controls, to effectively, in the first stage of the transfer chain, where the transfer has not happened and the state is still considering whether it can go through, that we can already there stop transfers that might lead to diversion. I want to make that a little bit concrete by explaining what then concretely the information is that we hope that states will share in there, and that is really then first and foremost data concerning concrete cases that they have prevented or that they have identified. And then we talk about the very specific details of the diversion, the timeline on how that happened, the ways and methods that were used, and obviously when that is appropriate and feasible for the state itself to do. The details also of all the actors were involved. And then more generally, we also refer to what is in the treaty itself, then states are encouraged to share. And then we look at Article 11.5 of the treaty, where there's talk about illicit arms transfer activities, including corruption, trafficking routes, illicit brokers, sources of illicit supply, methods of concealment. So very, very much operational things that states parties and signatory states can then discuss or enclose also in their interactions in the forum. But again, as I said in the beginning, that is also looked at as a complementary forum to the sub-working group that deals with the policy issues, in the sense that when from discussing these concrete cases, there are patterns established where there are general issues that could benefit from a broader discussion, including civil society, that they can then be more generally brought to the discussions in the general, in the subgroup on diversion. I heard you say, Rachel, that about the role of civil society. You will ask a separate question, so I will stop here.
Thanks, Tom. Stella, please.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. I just want to add just a few things. I see this diversion information exchange program as one extraordinary tool, as it is, we can say, it is a 2-step ahead in international cooperation in information sharing. But we have few things that we are not covering with this diversion information exchange platform. One problem which appears here is sometimes lack of courage of the party to share information. Sometimes it is a lack of willingness to share information. Sometimes we have to count that some cases are still open, and it is impossible to share information of the open cases between among all participants of the forums. And we are coming here to other part of cooperation. It is bilateral cooperation. So countries have to decide, are they willing to share information with the whole community, or they are willing to share just a part or whole information with concrete bilateral communication. Sometimes it is sometimes I have to stress that willingness to share information is crucial here, because we are facing with facts that we have a lot of diversion cases that we didn't have enough information shared by the countries where diversion occurs, or by the country from the origin of which is country of origin of the arms. It is just a small comment from my side. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Stella. And I do want to follow up. I think, you know, as we wrap our head around why this confidential forum may be desirable and useful in this context, I wonder in terms of, and this leads to my question on NGOs. So Jonah and Ambassador, please feel free to jump in sort of on this little combination. But the terms of reference for this diversion exchange forum are also unavailable publicly. So there's sort of an inherent assuming that something could be happening behind closed doors, because we don't know even what the terms of reference of the process are. And I think, as has been clear in this conversation, you know, there are a lot of different actors involved in preventing and mitigating diversion. And certainly the ATT is a treaty for governments. But as the ambassador said at the outset, there's been very active civil society participation in the development of the treaty, and certainly on helping states implement the treaty. So because civil society is notably absent from this diversion information exchange forum, I still think there are ways in which civil society can contribute. So I don't want to lose sort of that civil society thread. Obviously, I have a self-interest here, but, you know, speaking the contribution that CAR has made, as well as numerous other civil society organizations, the partners, UNIDIR, Small Arms Survey, and this project. How do you see all of this sort of fitting together with civil society playing an active part in the efforts and measures to address diversion? Yes, please, Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Well, I'm absolutely sure that at one point or another, when we have the platform working, we will require and we will be able to engage with civil society regarding the work and the functioning of this forum. There's no margin for a treaty of this kind not to continue having the support and the inputs and the information and the advice of civil society. And there's no margin just because we never have to forget that this is the first treaty in the history of international law that links something that was very much state-oriented, like peace and stability and international security, the way that the Charter created, but also human rights and humanitarian law and international law of human rights. So it would be impossible not to have civil society as part of our constituency when we are dealing with a treaty that is trying to prevent diversion for human suffering, that is used for human suffering. So the thing is that we have to be patient. That's what I think. we have to be patient, all of us, to start like Jack the Ripper, step by step. So the first thing is today at 12 a.m., at the end of this today, to have a forum, to have a platform with Decision 13. And once, hopefully, we have a platform, we also have the possibility of revising the work of the platform in CSP 8. And once we have a platform today, hopefully at the end of the day, we already have the budget and we have the plan and everything to start working with the platform next year. So we already have the possibility and the planning of. So it will be definitely a trial and error thing in the sense of we are going to have the first experience next year. And I'm sure that many states will bring the need of, at one point, engage with civil society. But we have to be honest, the confidential treatment of certain information is part of the essence of many of these issues. It has been in the discussions since the beginning of the treaty. At this stage, we, among states, we want to experience this forum, and countries also need to, as Stella was saying, you know, when you talk about willingness or courage, those are two different things. And so countries also need to be very comfortable with the way that information is being exchanged, the way that confidentiality is being treated when the information is exchanged. And we are on uncharted waters, honestly. All of us have been witnessing, probably at one point or another of our expertise, a real case of diversion, or close to observe something of the kind of hard information. We are in uncharted waters of information exchange on these issues. So that's the only thing that I think we have to be patient, and I'm sure that civil society will continue, especially because, you know, when you have to assess a case, you have different sources of information in order to assess a case. Some information might come from the governments on agencies, some might come from other governments or other agencies, some may come from regional organizations or mechanisms. But I'm sure that some information might come from civil society, of course. So at one point, of course, the forum will have to be enriched by the information and the inputs and the contributions of some important civil societies and NGOs that deal with these issues on a daily basis. So it's just a matter, on my behalf, I think it's a matter of patience and to trust, but verify, like we all say in Disarmament.
Thank you. Jonah, please, and then Tom.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate the words of the ambassador. And like you, Rachel, I'm of course biased in this discussion. And, you know, we're very appreciative of, you know, all of the engagement that we've been able to have with the ATT process, as well as all of the cooperation that we've received from states that, you know, both invite us into their countries to conduct this kind of work, but also that respond to trace requests on diverted items that we identify in our work. But, you know, I think that there's certainly, there's obviously a role to play by civil society, and there are important gaps that need to be filled, whether it's at the policy level discussion or at the practical field level. I think at the policy level, a good example of our interaction with export control agencies are the regular confidential briefings to our donor, the EU, their working party on conventional arms export, or COARM. And I believe that this information has been useful that we've provided during those briefings to export licensing authorities. And then on a field level, like I mentioned, I think activities around end-use monitoring, risk assessments, and verification is a role that civil society can certainly play. But granted, I think there's tremendous trust building that is going on right now just between states themselves throughout this process. And I understand that that's the priority. And I think, and there is trust building between states and civil society, and both of those need to run in parallel. But it's a major undertaking, and it's relatively new, I think, in this field. But I'm hopeful that we'll get there. Thanks.
And if I could just add, I think releasing the terms of reference for that group would go a long way to sort of alleviate concerns about the trust and the lack of transparency in the process. Because I think there is an understanding of why you would want sort of a forum for states parties. I think understanding how that will be run and why that has to be secret, I think that's the part that a lot of I think states also have some questions, states parties. I was interested that Tom said the forum would be open to states parties and signatories, because that's completely unclear from the way that the limited amount of information that's available is presented. So that's good. There could be, however, other observer states that might have played an interesting role in a diversion or countering a diversion that we would want to also bring in. So understanding how there could be sort of that exchange of information, I think would be quite helpful. Tom, I know you had a moment, something to say, and then I do want to, I've been taking note of some of the questions that have been put on the Q&A. So I will get to some of those after Tom's response.
Thank you, Rachel. I've been listening carefully to what you all had to say. And obviously, when it comes to transparency, I've been transparency co-chair for the past 3 years, and even before that, I think I made very clear that I hold transparency very close to my heart. And I think that when it comes to the process that led up to now having a draft decision on this forum, that we at some point have tried to give some input on that process in also our public briefings during the actual meetings of the working group on transparency and reporting. For example, the fact that that signatory states are included, I think, was very clear. That was already part of the three-tier approach on diversion. So, and also on a number of aspects, I think we did include that. But the fact that now this forum will be only open to states parties and signatories, and that also the rules that will govern discussions in that forum are not circulated among all stakeholders, is because it is still a very sensitive issue. It's a very fragile discussion, also a fragile process to come up to this point that we are actually going to establish this forum. So in that sense, I also follow the ambassador that maybe there can be an evolution in that. But at this point, even I, as transparency chair, have to admit that we cannot have an open forum for the kind of discussions that we hope states parties will be willing to have, because then there's also a point that I wanted to make following on what was said before. And what I think Stella said first about the willingness of states parties to share share that information. That, for me, will also be the biggest challenge. But in that respect, I think that when you look at what the treaty has to say about diversion information exchange, that it's basically the duty and responsibility of states parties to do so. And also this forum comes out of long discussions on how this information exchange could work among states parties. And with first the three-tier approach and then the discussions on this forum, all states parties were always very enthusiastic about the opportunity, while I'm saying then that that enthusiasm will need to be translated into action, into actually bringing the cases that states parties are dealing with to the forum to discuss them. That will be a sign of states parties' commitment to the information exchange and to the forum. The very last point that I wanted to make, also know that we very much appreciate always the input that civil society has to bring, and in this specific field, especially conflict armament research. And as an official of an EU member state, I'm very familiar with the great work that the conflict armament research does. As the EU, we also support conflict armament research, and they are very devoted in bringing also this kind of information to our attention. And in that sense, it will be possible within the forum for states parties and for signatory states to invite organizations such as conflict armament research that have expertise in investigating and establishing diversion to assist them in presenting certain information, and then to be involved in the debate on that. So that is something even beyond what I said earlier, but what I want to repeat also now is that when out of these, let's call them confidential exchanges, come issues that could benefit from discussion in the subgroup, that will then happen, which then obviously gives the opportunity to civil society to weigh in on the actual policy measures on diversion that might be discussed. But so also within the forum itself, when it concerns cases of a state party, of a signatory state, they themselves can involve also non-state experts like the people from conflict armament research in those discussions. By that, I think that I've covered all your comments that you made just now.
Thanks, Tom. I want to be respectful of everyone's time and end this on time. So I want to sort of summarize the questions that I see in the Q&A, because the majority of them are about specific measures that states can undertake, whether it's asking questions about specific post-delivery verification, what does that look like, to how you would address diversion by private military groups, as well as measures around reporting. And I should mention working the synergies between what the ATT is doing on diversion and other international agreements and instruments such as the Firearms Protocol, which there's clearly a link with regards to specific measures. I would also remind panelists and participants that Article 13.2 in reporting encourages a report on measures that states have taken to address diversion. And to date, there has not been, it's not a mandatory report, it's an encouraged report, but there hasn't been any report submitted. There's no format for that report. And that was mentioned as well in the questions as a way in which states can contribute to the discussion on diversion. So in these last few minutes, I'll give everyone sort of an opportunity to talk about, if you don't like those questions, but anything about the specific measures to address diversion, or sort of where you see this process going next, since we will not meet in person for quite some time. So I'll just sort of go in order and give everyone a last moment to say 1 or 2 minutes. We'll start with the ambassador, please.
Thank you. I think that one of the issues, the most important issue, will be the cooperation among states in order to develop national strategies for prevent diversion. And I think it's not a matter only to exchange views on specific cases. And we understand, and I read the questions, that several people will be worried about specific cases that are out there. So I'm sure that whatever is out there will be part of the discussions at one point in the platform. But also we have to keep in mind that part of the treaty is the international cooperation to strengthening transparency within our states and between our states. And that is a great work that we can do at ATT, because there's not a single thing written in stone how to prevent diversion. On the contrary, we are on uncharted waters on regional cooperation and international cooperation. So I think that the way forward is to start working on this soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Stella, I'll go to you next. I think you're still on mute.
Yes, I hope that you can hear me. Well, I would like to highlight one more time. Cooperation, both bilateral and multilateral. We have to strengthen our own national capacities in order to exchange that kind of information through bilateral and multilateral exchange. Then we have to strengthen our reporting capacities and to move our transparency at the highest possible level. In that case, we will have capacities to answer to different kind of this very complex process, because this process in each part have their own gaps. So we need in any kind of this action, we need different approaches, and we need different kind of measures to be taken in order to respond to diversion. So we have to put our resources on the highest possible level. And I would like to stress one more time that post control is of the greatest importance. But there we have sometimes lack of resources because post control issues a lot of resources given by the state. And also we should start to think to use some new instrument in order of monitoring already exported goods, especially through delivery verification certificates. We are already using this kind of certificates, but we have to think to use these certificates as a mandatory documentation in order to have a wider picture of the use of the goods after delivery or possible transfer to an unauthorized end user.
Thank you, Stella. Tom, I'll give you a last word.
Thank you, Rachel. I will take a few things that were said together when people talking about post-delivery verification, or more generally NQs and diversion monitoring, and then what is happening on that also in other fora where there could be synergies. And it's clear that that is the way forward. Cooperation between states on these kind of things will make diversion more difficult. If we make sure that, for example, already exporter and importer states work closely together even before that the goods are exported, then diversion later will be more difficult. And in that, I think that there is also a very important role for the importer, for example, also to be transparent about things that could happen, or eventually, when the transfer is effected, will happen. If, for example, firearms are lost, this and that, then I think that transparency about that to the exporter might be a way to further work together to avoid that happening again, or to address it at hand. My last point was very technical point. Actually, you referred to the reporting article and the reporting on diversion measures or anti-diversion measures that's in there. I think that it was already clear in the discussions of the transparency working group, where this was discussed many times, that states parties do not see do not see a template as the way forward to reporting on what they do to address diversion. And I think that with the multi-year work plan of the subgroup, and now with the Diversion Exchange Forum, there are fora where states can talk about this in an interactive discussion, and that can be considered as the reporting that states do towards other states parties, but also towards other ATT stakeholders. And for that reason, I don't think that we will address an actual report anymore within the ATT framework, since there are now the fora to do so.
Thank you for that clarification, Tom. Jonah, I want to let you also have a last word.
Okay, just quickly, just since you mentioned post-delivery verification, I think there were a few questions regarding that. Just to put it into practical terms, I mean, this very simply is a confidence building exercise that requires going and doing actual spot checks of weapons, not only in capital at the first location of receipt of weapons, but down the supply chain to the users, to the forces that employ them, either in those same locations or in frontline areas. Just to cite, I think, a very good example of this that we've been engaged in is a joint verification of weapons and ammunition with the federal government of Somalia, in compliance with the UN arms embargo on Somalia. And I think that this kind of experience can be replicated in other places. And then just lastly on tools and research, just to highlight that we are currently developing a web portal interface as part of our EU-funded iTrace project for all EU member states to enable them to use dashboards to interrogate data on their diverted weapons, as well as red flags that we identify. And we're also aiming next year to expand this service beyond EU states. So we're here to help and, you know, where we can to contribute to growing this and mitigating the problem. So thank you.
Thanks, Jonah. And I just want to, as questions continue to be added to the Q&A chain, I just want to emphasize that our panelists can go in and see the questions. So I know there were a lot of comments in those questions as well, particularly about the Diversion and Exchange Forum. So I will encourage the panelists while I'm finishing up here to just review those final comments. I am very appreciative of everyone sticking with us a few minutes over time. I think it's a really important conversation and certainly demonstrates the relevancy and timeliness of a conversation on diversion, not just because today is the first day of the Conference of States Parties, but because this is an issue that is so prescient for so many issues in the ATT and for those working to combat the impacts of the arms trade. So I'm really appreciative of our panelists for dedicating not only time today, but really so much of their work life to these issues. I think it is incredibly important that we not have this be a one-time discussion, but really a discussion that will continue in this post-COVID world or current COVID world, wherever the ATT takes us. So I really do appreciate this. As a reminder, this event was part of a larger project that UNIDIR, the Stimson Center, Conflict Armament Research and Small Arms Survey are working on together. We, as Jonah mentioned, there was an earlier paper report that was released earlier this summer. There are 2 additional reports forthcoming looking at specific measures and legal instruments. And so we are looking very much forward to continuing this conversation in that format. If you're interested in finding out more about the project, there's a UNIDIR webpage dedicated to this, or you can go to the event page for this event and you'll have links to all of the different work that has been done. So thank you all. We had far more participants in this side event than we've ever had at a side event during the CSP. And though I personally would rather be sharing a gelato with all of you on the streets of Geneva right now, I'm very appreciative for you joining in from all corners of the world to be part of this discussion. And I look forward to our next ATT meeting, hopefully in person and certainly in future discussions with all of you. So thank you again. Have a good rest of your day if it's just beginning, or a good night if it is near its end. Thank you very, very much.